Hi, I'm Tony Riddle, and this is the Nat Life Pod, a platform for conversation to help close the gap between wellness as an industry and wellness as a state of being. Before we get rolling with the conversation, just want to introduce you to this. It's called ION, Intelligence of Nature. It's for gut and the microbiome. All natural and backed by science, it's a daily supplement that helps support a healthy gut, igniting the body's innate ability to strengthen the gut lining, improve digestion, defend from toxins, and boost nutrient absorption. Gentle enough for the whole family, ION supports a diverse gut microbiome that works at the foundation of health, from immune function to the gut-brain axis, so you can thrive from head to toe. Now, who doesn't want to thrive from head to toe? There you go. Go get it. ION, Intelligence of Nature. Links in the show notes. Welcome back to the Nat Life Pod. And oh, what a magical conversation I have for you. But first, I want to thank 42 Acres for supporting us and creating the space for this conversation to happen. I appreciate all that you do. Now, I've been a big fan of my next guest for quite some time, and on the few occasions that we have met, I've always been blown away by this man's mind. In this episode, I have the honour of interviewing Zach Bush. Zach graces the mic with his unique perspective and expertise and shares his profound insights into the interconnectedness of human health and the environment. So prepare yourselves for a perspective shift as we delve deep into the fascinating world of the microbiome, regenerative farming, extinction, consciousness, and our disconnection from nature. We unpack the state of our healthcare systems and food systems and how these systems are actually financially incentivized to compromise the health of humanity. Furthermore, Zach highlights the importance of reconnecting with nature and our food systems to cultivate a deeper sense of consciousness to promote personal and planetary transformation. I hope you enjoy this enlightening conversation as much as we did. We're ready to roll.
You are ready.
Zach Bush,
spectacular.
Behind the mic. Thanks for coming, man.
Thrilled to be here.
This is something. I'm a massive fan. Yeah, I just want let's share that to begin with. Just I love the work, man. I'm always just thrilled when a new podcast comes out. Thrilled to have met you and spent some time together.
Yeah.
That was beautiful. What I loved in that moment was you arriving in a taxi from whatever journey you'd had, the door slides back, and immediately you come out and you say, Tony Riddle, I've been dying to meet you, man, and have a hug. And it was like, you have no idea how much I've been dying to meet you. And now here we are.
And we're here. We're back in it. I love it. Yeah, what a joy to connect over that. And it was a joy to be humbled by you as we went through the natural movement coursework, and you made me feel so much pain in my own body. It's the most uncomfortable I've ever been on camera.
It's like what we have with your mind.
Yeah. Fair enough.
It's like a lovely mind-body combination that we have going on here now.
Touché.
Someone recently came and did a certification with me. It's called Nat Life Coach. And he was from San Francisco. His name's Eric. And you would have met Eric. Eric went to the experience you just come back with, the Kogi.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And I'd love to hear about the Kogi because there's this piece on the age of 9 where they go in as babies and they re-emerge as a 9-year-old, a chosen one, right? And they're boys, right? Is that right?
Yeah, the momos are all, man, yeah.
And it's the piece about being 9, because whenever I've studied like the developmental stages, and I'm kind of a bit obsessed by that work and having kids and unschooling them. It's always been the developmental stages that we speak to the templates, and the observations that are made through those templates play out the rest of our lives, really, right? And so I've had this 1,000 days is the emotional brain. It's like the last trimester plus 3 years is our real emotional development in brain frequencies of that. And then we kind of go into the imagination brain and form this imagination and playful sense of an environment. And we had Peter Gray on recently unpacking that, how even in the indigenous tribes, you have 4-year-olds, really. It's when they enter more of the freedom to play, where they're away from the several mother, several father experience, and the kids are just together, and from 4 and then till late teens. And then from that imagination brain, that takes us up to 7. Then it's more of that analytical brain coming in. So So my question, I guess, is what's the 9 years? How does that come in? How does that come into play? Or maybe unpack what the whole process is, because I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary, almost black box still to us. For scientifically, we are just grasping at straws in some ways in understanding the in utero phenomenon. Like imagining what an infant, or a fetus is experiencing is just so far beyond our imagination in so many ways. And it's so tragic in some ways that the human mind isn't set up to store memory from our first capacity for thought or experience or sensation.
Right?
What would you remember when you had that kind of, sunset colors all day long in your mother's womb, of a little bit of light filtering through her belly and only having her heartbeat and her respiratory rate, and then maybe muffled voices in some distant, room off in the distance like that. That must be such a primordial state of comfort. Everything is being provided you moment by moment.
Well, it's like that's the one consciousness.
Yeah. The universe is like giving you this, putting you into this portal between the infinite and the finite, which in and of itself blows your mind. Like, how does an infinite being start to experience the finite? What are the first sensations you're going to have? And isn't that why we're signing up for a finite journey? Like in some ways you're giving up so much, if you've ever had a near-death experience, or you've ever had maybe a journey with, deep trauma in your life, loss of a child, these deep heartbreaks of relationship breakups or whatever it is, they can take us into these moments of glimpsing what it feels like to be infinite, And so you give up so much to believe that you're separate from everything, and you give up so much to come into a moment where you only know what you're feeling right now. And you forget that you're put into a state of amnesia where you forget that you're from this connected reality of everything is waveforms and vibrations of the universe that are expressing the beauty of the face of the divine. Like, to sign up to forget all that, you wouldn't do it if it wasn't so exquisite.
What am I choosing to come into this?
What's the
why am I here?
And I think those first few sensations of just hearing a heartbeat and feeling tempo. When there's timelessness, when you're outside of time, I don't know that there's even tempo, because the whole concept of a heartbeat is actually a separation of time. Like there's a 1,000, 1,000, that kind of pace of a heartbeat even requires the belief of a linear timeline and the experience of time. And so that your mother's heartbeat might have been your first experience of time coming in from a timeless space of existence is fascinating. That this is your metronome that starts you into a pattern of, okay, this is what it's going to be like. I'm going to be alive in a body that knows the difference between one heartbeat to the next. And I can say that was the past heartbeat, and this is the now heartbeat, and there's going to be a future heartbeat. It must be a subtle training going on in that like primordial human consciousness for me of like, oh my gosh, this is what it feels like to be marching through time instead of experiencing it all at once. And so I'm entranced by that in some ways, because that's ultimately the fastest way that I can now find it in my adult life when I'm struggling in a abstract reality that has been co-created by 8 billion people. The only options is basically sheer terror, anxiety, depression, if you really are embodying that state and not being rooted back in your infinite nature, because the abstract realities are too much for a human consciousness or a human emotional body to handle.
Yeah, and also I guess how we've been plucked out the womb, and whether that's been a surgical pharmaceutical experience or whether it's been, obviously there's reasons that it doesn't work out that way compared to a natural birth, and also then how long we've then been attached to the mothership. Is there the real length of time of nurture that's been created through things like breastfeeding, that should be or could be, we could use nature as a lens to get the biological norm, the natural norm, which we could say is 4 years, right? I went down a bit of a rabbit hole around microbiome with birth and was looking at the breast milk and breast milk having properties in it that feed the microbiome of the baby. And you can correct me on this, but it seems got to this point where the baby's microbiome reaches more maturity at the age of 3. Is that right?
Yeah, it goes through different phases. So, when the child is first born, if gifted with the opportunity for a vaginal delivery, and like you point out, many surgeries, surgical endpoints, which are more of a sterile experience where the infant doesn't have the chance to travel down that vaginal canal and be planted with the organic garden that it's capable of doing. But in an ideal situation, you're traveling for hours through that vaginal canal, and you're adopting into the child's skin, into their eyes, into their sinuses and nose, into the throat, and ultimately into what will become the lung experience, all the way down into the gut. That mother's flora, that mother's organic garden of the vaginal flora, is planting those seeds of life into the child. And we're starting to come to terms with the fact that there's actually microbes even in the utero and in the blood brain, behind the blood brain barrier, and all these places that we thought were holy of holies and always sterile. We're coming to terms with the fact there's microbiome everywhere. And so there's probably a bit of a garden that's going on in the womb that's nursemaiding, the situation, so that there's not really a sterile, infant there. And then this adopts into a vast ecosystem through the vaginal canal exit. And that will be the dominant flora on their skin and their gut for the first 3 to 6 months of life. And then by 3 months, it's starting transition. By 6 to 9 months, you're starting to look like the mother's skin flora. So the child's gut is starting to look a lot more like the mom's skin. Based on breastfeeding and just physical contact, kids against mom and all of that physical contact. So the child is now adopting a much different flora. It's a lot of gram negatives and anaerobes and things like this in the vaginal flora, and now it's a lot of aerobic bacteria and totally different kind of flora fauna kind of going on by the time you're 6-9 months old. And that's, of course, when you're starting to also integrate foods outside of breast milk and starting to get exposed to small amounts of, complex food systems and different nutrient reservoirs and all that. And so all of these steps are creating these different chapters in a child's microbiome. And so maturation might be one way of looking at it, but in some ways there's a loss there too. It makes me think that now that we know that human consciousness or human intelligence or human intellect or human creativity even are all coming from the microbiome. There is no such thing as a human thought. Like the human brain has never thought anything. The human brain is a central processing unit that takes information in from a vast amount of billions of neurons that are sensing its environment. And then it's taking all that data and finding patterns in it. But all of the information that would then form that thought is all coming from the ecosystem. So
from the whole environment.
There really is a nature speaking through us rather than a human that comes in the world and has a thought or has a creative expression. The human, as it comes into that singularity, especially becomes this creative force where nature's speaking through it and nature's expressing something of beauty and creativity and curiosity through this single central processing unit that we call a human brain. But it's not the brain that's doing that. Just like your computer has never written a term paper. The person sitting down at the computer writes that term paper, but the person isn't the computer. The person is just a data stream that's putting information into the keyboard. And we now know that the keyboard of the human brain is largely represented by the neurons in the gut lining that the bacteria and fungi are typing on. And so the fingers on your keyboard of your computer are not human, they're microbial. So when you come to terms with that, and then you start to look at human behavior and the patterns, like we start getting programmed with the egoic structures that are necessary to protect us in a world where we think we were abandoned by nature. And that happens as early as kind of age 3 to 5, you start to see those transitions happen. And so what's happened to the microbiome? What kind of decrements or losses have we had by the time we're willing to believe that nature rejected us and that we need an ego to protect us from all things that are separate from us? And so in some ways there's this temptation of thinking, well, we're just maturing through life. We're getting more intelligent, or microbiome's getting more complex, when maybe it's the complete opposite.
Yeah, there's a disconnection from the eco, but then a connection to the ego, which is a divorce of that, right?
Exactly. And in the womb, we know that, the infant, at 9 months maturation in the womb hasn't taken a first breath yet, but has more eggs in those ovaries to produce the future of humanity than it will ever have. There will be a steady decrement in the number of eggs. There's more neural connections and synaptic connections at 9 months in the womb than there ever will be in the rest of that life. So in some ways, our biologic pinnacle is at 9 months in the womb. And then we have this steady decrement through a lifetime that then ends in death. And so is our optimal life, is our optimal intelligence, is our optimal connectivity actually at the moment of our first breath in some ways? And if that's the case, then when are we going to start to get curious about that as humans? And instead of thinking of that thing as a, immovable, kind of immobile, vessel for breast milk, what if that is God? What if that little, newborn 1 day, 2 days in is actually the most connected, guru teacher on the planet. And we tend to wrap it up and swaddle and stick it in a cradle and not ask. What are you thinking? What are you experiencing? And I'm hopeful that we're getting to a point with our scientific technologies and stuff that we can start to ask plants. We're starting to be able to listen to plants. We're putting EEG into a tree or a house plant, and you can start to see its response to human, curiosity or human love. You send an emotion to the plant and it reacts. Why aren't we doing that to an
Yeah, because it's not verbal, it's non-verbal. That's emotional communication, right?
Nonverbal is such a high vibration experience, right? So now you're in this telepathic capacity. So if your houseplants are capable of sensing telepathic communication and participating in telepathic communication, it's been shown that if you have houseplants that have been in your life for even a few months, if you put EEGs on those and then you send the person who takes care of those out of the house, send them some distance away, the moment they come within 2,000 meters or 2 kilometers from the home, the plants all perk up. They can feel the person coming from 2 kilometers away. And so if plants are that sentient, that they are that connected, even in a pot in your house, totally disconnected seemingly from nature, if that thing is feeling 2 kilometers of space and then waiting for the excitement of being like, the person who loves me, the person who planted me is coming back. How phenomenal.
Also,
that's a house plant.
Also, what are our babies feeling, right?
What is the baby feeling?
What's the baby feeling in that?
And what does the baby know that you have forgotten?
Yeah, I also went down a rabbit hole, Joseph Chilton Pearce's work. Have you come across that? It's a fantastic book for anyone. It's called Magical Child. And he blew our minds at the beginning. It's before Lola was coming into the world, our eldest, who's now 14. And it flipped our world because it was this understanding that if you take a baby up to more than 12 feet away from it, when you're speaking to how much, what distance are we talking now with that plant?
2 kilometers.
But his work was suggesting not anything beyond 12 feet, the baby will become incoherent. And when you bring the mother and baby together, the baby becomes coherent again, like heart math. So that was speaking to that piece of, wow, okay, what are we doing then if we're separating or we're putting baby in different room in a cot, walking out? What's happening within that? If it's been in the mothership in that state of one consciousness for 9 months, and then before we recognize we're at say 9 months, we're being removed from that very frequency.
Yeah, and there's a physical aspect to that, but I think it can be bridged by a feeling aspect. So just as the plant can feel 2 kilometers away, learning how to go into coherence with your child with feelings rather than emotions, I think can expand that umbrella massively, But because we've been so trained out of feeling anything, and we're so duped into this drug reactivity of emotions being radically different than feelings, the emotional, bandwidth, or the emotional, let's say, freak wavelength is so brief. Emotions are created by a neurochemical dependent pathway in the brain. So you have serotonin, dopamine, some of these pleasure pathways, in the last 7 seconds in the neurosynapse. And so it's just this brief little hit. You say, oh, I'm feeling happy, or oh, I'm feeling sad, or those little emotional hits are these momentary things. So if we rely on that field of emotional connection to our children, they're feeling abandoned every 7 seconds.
Yeah.
Because if you don't know how to feel, you don't know how to create a carrier wave to let that child feel what the ocean of your unconditional love feels like. Because you don't know how to generate it, because you've been duped down into this emotional reactivity of life. And so there's a huge opportunity for us to begin at the moment of our first experience, often of unconditional love, is seeing the face of our first child. That there's just something that happens that's seemingly inexplicable because we don't remember what it felt like to look at mother for the first time. But obviously that was, that's unconditional love. That child coming out of the womb is in a complete state of unconditional love for mother and probably for father as well.
Yeah.
And so we don't remember what that felt like when it first happened. And by the time you're able to start to communicate and have a memory, our first earliest memories are typically around 5-6 years old. Sometimes people get lucky and have a 3-year-old or 4-year-old memory, but for the most part, you've already been trained into an emotional reality and trained out of trusting or knowing how to experience feelings by the time you have a memory. And so that's why we have to wait until we have a child to experience unconditional love as a contrast to this
reminder,
disconnect and be like, oh, this is what it feels like to be alive.
Mm.
Because up until that moment, you really weren't fully being alive. You were being so distracted from the present moment and the fullness of the present moment and the capacity to feel, because you were looking for the next drug and looking for that next little hit, that next little interact. And I recognize this in myself on a daily basis. I'm always looking for the next stimulus of somebody's thought or somebody's reaction to my thought, or I want to tell somebody what I'm thinking or feeling at that moment. And I'm not actually just dropping in and being me. I'm so busy looking outside of myself for some sort of affirmation or reassurance or mirror, because I've forgotten how to just feel me.
The external.
Looking for those external stimuli.
Yeah, and I guess also, again, bringing it back to a natural setting, if we can, of the observations of several mothers, several fathers. It brings us right back to the Kogi tribe, right?
Sure does.
I have to be mindful of my own tangents here if I suddenly lose myself. So how does that work then if it's a baby that enters the cave, let's say, and the baby doesn't reemerge until the age of 9?
Well, I think I could be mistaken about this, but I think generally they are not put in the cave directly. So they're around age 3 that they get put in.
Okay, that makes sense.
And so they go through a formative phase with, socialization and all that. And then they're put into the cave before they start to develop that egoic split vulnerability around age 3. They can be put into a cave if they're chosen for that path. And so that spiritual path is really developing third sight, right? And so they put them into complete darkness for 3 years, 6 years, 9 years. It kind of varies depending on which of the indigenous groups you're with, and whether the child is continuing to be picked for this higher path of third sight, or if the child is, chosen to come out of that at an earlier age. So I don't think it's like one prescription for all of them.
Okay.
So the momos or the wisdom keepers are sensing into the individual and to put them on their path, and to sense what that individual is asking for on their path as far as the length of time in the cave. But if you've ever gotten to be in complete darkness, it's everything but dark, right? You get this spectacular psychedelic experience relatively quickly, even within seconds sometimes, because the human brain doesn't acknowledge the existence of nothing. And frankly, the human, being is just part of a nature that knows there is nothing, knows there is no such thing as nothing. So your whole sentience, your whole being knows that vacuum space is full of so much stuff. And so to go into that third sight is basically starting to experience the entire universe without the lie that is your eyes. Your visual cortex is the most extraordinary example of a perceptual lie as to how the universe works. And the Course in Miracles and other bodies of work say that our senses were specifically designed, uniquely and specifically designed, to give us the impression that we were separate. And the eyes are such an interesting version of this, because I can look at you with my human visual cortex and the eye connected to it, and I think, oh, that's a blue shirt. But the fact is that shirt is reflecting blue off of it, because the only thing that shirt is not is blue.
Mm-hmm.
That shirt is actually vibrating with the entire spectrum of white light energy, the whole rainbow, except for blue. And it says, no, that's not me. And yet my eye says, that's you. You're the blue shirt. And so in this strange way, the human eye is naming everything for exactly what it is not. And that's a warning to us that every time you open your eyes, you're seeing the universe for everything that it is not. And if you start trusting that eyesight and building a whole world out of what you see with your eyes, you are participating in a massive holographic abstract reality that is the opposite of reality. And that's unfortunately what we've increasingly trusted, especially as we've divorced ourselves from our ability to feel. If you're really in a feeling state, then you know that a tree is so much more than green leaves and gray bark. You can wrap yourself around that tree and you get an entire, history of the cosmos from that tree. So if you can feel the tree, you're not tricked into thinking, oh yeah, it's got green leaves and blah, blah, blah. But as you get disconnected from nature and you start to lose your awareness of the full spectrum, a human being has 12 sensory systems, only 5 of which we now rely on because we've trained children not to pay attention to these other centers of sensory. The other 7 that are in the body are often referred to as chakra centers in the Eastern kind of constructs of philosophy and science. But you can just call these, basically energy centers within the body. And like any energy center, they're very reactive to the environment. So they can sense different things in the environment. So all 7 chakras are sensing different aspects of self or self within the context of the universe. And that's ultimately just a huge invitation for all of us to start to tune out, put yourself in that proverbial cave, start tuning out your 5 senses and find your other 7 senses. Start to be aware of what does it feel like right here in my forehead when I hug somebody. You're going to feel a lot if you pay attention.
The
And
awareness.
this is extremely sensitive. You'll feel upwards, you'll feel left to right. Each of us are going to sense slightly different experiences there. Historically, my 5th chakra or my throat chakra was the one that was most sensitive. And so I doctored this way for a long time. I would just pay attention to the tingling feeling that I would get in my sternocleidomastoids as I was talking to a patient, especially a patient that was nonverbal. So a lot of end of life stuff that I was doing as a hospice doctor for a while. And so when you're dealing with a patient who you think is in pain or you're thinking is in agony or you're afraid they might be, but they can't talk and they're in a coma or whatnot, I found it increasingly easy to sense what they were sensing by just paying attention to these other parts of my body. And I was nubile at that time. I was absolutely not good at feeling at that point in my life. But it was just enough to start cracking that door open of like, oh, I can sense something here. Now I rarely sense things here as much much more now in my gut, a little bit in my solar plexus, and a lot in the third eye kind of area in your 6th chakra there. And so you'll find, I think, in different points of life that there'll be different parts of you that's more sensory forward, and you're sensing the world better through one chakra than another, depending on where you are in life and depending on what perceptions your soul is really looking to experience in this part of your life. For me, I'm going through my massive second childhood. Like for years now, I've become a child again. I came through a beautiful 20-year marriage, 2 beautiful kids, and our paths beautifully, kind of separated there. And of course, there's heartbreak and all of the drama that happened for me, and thought I was unlovable and all the things that
the grieving
happened.
of that
The grieving because I was coming out of an abstract belief that this construct of a relationship was how I was worthwhile and all the usual stuff. But that helped me dismantle and of course, try a relationship a couple more times and try this or that to try to convince yourself you're worthwhile. But what happened about 3 or 4 years ago was just starting to realize that I had value and purpose outside of any human construct, most of all my own mind, but any contractual relationship, jobs, mortgages, the marriage certificates and contracts. And those are just such recent human constructs, last couple hundred years of a 300,000-year human history and a multi-billion-year history of life on the planet. And yet those are so powerful.
We put so much value on.
We put so much value and self-value or self-failure writ into these documents that have absolutely no bearing on nature. Like nature has absolutely no idea what a mortgage is, has absolutely no idea what the concept of ownership is. And I think it must just be dumbfounded to feel the vibration of humans that are trying to own love. Like, what a ridiculous concept,
Yeah.
And so these contracts that we're putting in place are just this. I've been in this super uncomfortable adult phase and a very joyful experience of being a child again. And I waver between those 2 worlds from moment to moment, even on my 3-hour drive here through the English countryside, a couple phone calls, all that. childlike just exuberance and joy of just like I'm in the universe and I'm free and I'm a sovereign being and I'm loved and by everything in the cosmos, and the universe is playing with me all the time, wants me to see that, and then wants to just, and if I see it, it gets all excited, like, you saw the miracle, I'm going to show you more, you're just in this wonderment journey of
playful state of mind,
playful state. And then a split second later I can be like, oh, but your adult mind kicks in and you're like, well, I'm not even in a relationship, and my companies work fine without me, and my kids are off and they're all adults and doing their thing, and I'm not important to them. And so where's my value? And I should really do something with my life.
The external stuff coming in again. Yeah, it comes like, crashing in.
I need to make myself valuable again. Where am I needed? And so I think there's just this constant uncomfortableness that I'm experiencing these days as I move more and more into a lifestyle of childness. Is magical, but it's also very disruptive to other people around me. Like, when people find out that I'm not going to be, in some sort of construct of relationship or ownership over them, or me be owned by them just because we had chemistry or we have a connection. Well, then there's this whole thing of like, well, maybe I'm being rejected, and I can do the exact same thing of like, oh my gosh, this person doesn't want to connect with me for more than a few minutes of a conversation at a dinner, and there's no follow-up, but I felt like it was really important. And so then we can just start questioning all the adult things. Instead of being the child, you just like showed up at dinner, had the amazing conversation, and then the next moment is ready for the universe to gift.
It's the baby brain, right? Literally comes in, right, that's gone. In here, out there, next one comes in.
Yeah,
that's a beautiful space to be in.
It's a beautiful space, but terrifying if your value system lies out of that, And so that's been my dance for the last few years. Super uncomfortable. Don't recommend it to everybody, but everybody better try it.
I was speaking to Simon earlier because I was going through this. We've moved recently. I had lots of projects going on. Some of it hasn't quite worked out, and felt like I was dancing with the heart-led, gut-led, kind of head-led responsibility. And then that other voice came in of irresponsible, So there's this, the heart, trusting the gut, trusting the heart, and that leading the head almost. And then also the normalized templates of the today, perhaps coming in, crashing in as, are you just not being irresponsible here? Responsibility and irresponsibility coming in. That felt like for me recently.
Yep.
Because again, I'm very much in there. I'm in that very playful state of mind, which can drive people nuts as well. Because if they're not familiar with it, it's a feeling that perhaps you're not being present, but you're incredibly present. That's the point. It's just there aren't so many distractions going on,
Yeah. Yeah. I think that distraction piece doesn't exist in nature. Nature cannot be distracted because it's so damn present. And yet the human mind is the most distractible, vessel that we've ever maybe experienced on the planet. And so what is it about a human mind that makes it so distractible? And I believe that it comes down to a wound. Like it has to have a deep wound in there.
Early wound, right?
That really, really hurt so bad that we recoiled from reality. So we couldn't handle, this belief that was put on us at some point that we were rejected by nature. So we recoiled instead of just leaning in and being like, is that even possible to get rejected by nature? Because I think when you start to lean in there, you find out that that's not actually possible, because my cells are nature.
Yeah, we are nature.
Microbiome is speaking through me. My breath is nature. I'm made of all of the elements of nature. Yeah. So how is it that my mind can hold this belief that's so obviously wrong, so erroneous at its foundation, that we can believe it? And I can only suppose that nature has a design of that too. And so we are, by design of nature, doing a human journey of separateness and abandonment disorder and all the things that come with it. And so why would we be put on that journey? Why would we sign up for that journey? Like, there's got to be a lot of other intelligent beings in a universe of 2.5 trillion galaxies, each with 5 billion suns. Like, there's a few other options out there. Why did we sign up to become the one species, to embody the species that was going to go on this separate journey, this wound of that would be so prone to the distraction, so prone to the drug-like relationship, codependence of everything, codependent to our coffee in the morning, codependent to the relationship, codependent to our jobs, codependent to our self-identity as other people see it. And I can only think that we are very excited to be the cataclysmic event in the universe.
Curiosity that led that, perhaps.
Perhaps curiosity, but I think we are excited to be part of the cataclysm. We're the engineers of the sixth great extinction on a planet that perhaps sits at a chakra center within the entire universe at a moment when the universe needs to choose its vibration. The universe is going through complex mathematical structural geometry changes all the time as it matures through its lifespan. And there's some physicists that believe that we're currently about to jump into the 13th dimension of math at the universal level. Each planet has a dimensional quality to it. Our Earth has been in a three-dimensional geometry to the toral structure that is considered a gravitational phenomenon that creates the dynamics of the nature we live in, the tides and the relationship to our solar system, the moon, all of these things. All of that toral structure has been in a 3D state. And just recently, 2016-ish, there was major changes in our magnetic field, major changes in the way in which our Earth was functioning. And we were in fourth dimension math for a moment and then tripped into fifth dimension because 4D is not a very stable mathematics. But now we're in this fifth dimensional toroidal structure as a planet. And if that's true, and we're in a universe that's about to go to 13th dimensional, we picked a very interesting time to embody, because for billions of years, this planet has been in 3D, and now it suddenly goes 4 or 5D in just a couple of years, and you happen to be alive right now in a finite body that might only last for 50 or 80 or 90 years. You picked this like fraction of a second in cosmic time to show up right here, right now, to be part of this wounding, to be part of this embodiment of the cataclysmic separation of nature so that we would actually destroy nature. And so in our separateness, we became the existential threat to life on Earth. And so we are engineering the sixth extinction out of our sense of scarcity and vulnerability that comes from this wounded belief that our senses created, that we're somehow separate from nature and we're rejected by it and nature's against us. And that oppositional, relationship in our minds and our psychologies as humans have created this thing. And as an endocrinologist, which was my second subspecialty in medicine, you learn a lot about hormones and how they manage the body. And hormones are a communication network, but they also are a huge impetus for the behavior of genes. And so as genes turn into proteins, that incredible genetic expression, the endpoint of a single gene can turn into anywhere from 200 to 400 different proteins depending on its environment and stimulus. And so if a single gene, imagine a blueprint of a house that could build 400 different houses depending on the day, depending on the weather, depending on the thing. That's what your genome is doing. And if you multiply that out over 20,000 human genes, you're able to build your body, your temple is able to build 4 million different variants in a single day. So you're constantly rebuilding your temple, and you're building it according to the stimulus. And your endocrine system, or the hormones, are a huge determinant of what temple you're going to build today. And the interesting thing that you learn in endocrinology is that the body requires that there is stress. The body requires damage so that it can live long. If you put a body into a zero stress state where there's no injury occurring, you will die in just a few weeks.
Yeah, so like the hormetic stress leading to the growth within that.
Exactly. And so nature is needing stress. And the bigger the stress, the bigger the transformation it sets itself up for. And so it's very likely in my mind right now, this is not anybody's scripture or anything like that, but in my own little experience of my life, I'm starting to realize, wow, we could have picked this journey as humans, as a soul that wanted to be human right now, so that I would be the stressor on a planet at the tipping point of a universe, so that I could participate in deciding not just, what the now looks like, but I can actually help participate in what the future becomes on this planet. If I start to embrace the realization of I signed up for the wound so that I can become the antidote sitting inside the wound. And that's one of the beautiful things you find out in medicine, if you're willing to kind of eject out of the pharmaceutical model of there's a drug for everything. What you find out about drugs over time is that drugs are palliating the state that allowed the disease to occur.
Mm-hmm.
But the drug can never change the state or return or reverse the state that caused the disease. So the drugs can never cure. Drugs only change your experience with the disease state.
Mm-hmm.
But they can't create health because they don't actually come
Not operating at a cause level.
They're not coming in at the biologic or experiential level of why the disease occurred in the first place. I used to develop chemotherapy at the University of Virginia, and it was a patient of mine in my very first clinical trial. I'd managed to get a drug from benchtop to clinical trial. And my very first patient who was going to put those capsules in her mouth asked me at one point in the 45 minutes of me trying to convince her to swallow these capsules, she asked this question at one point of whatever's in these capsules, what does that have to do with the reason I got cancer?
Mm-hmm.
And that was a question I could not answer.
That's one that hits the throat chakra, right?
I could feel it through every cell in my body when she asked it, of like, because obviously not only could I not answer that question, it exposed the king with no clothes. Like, it's like, oh my God, nothing I've spent the last 17 years learning is getting at the reason this woman has cancer. Literally nothing. And so I had just spent $200,000 in 17 years of my life becoming a multi-specialty doctor at an Ivy League university in the third best endocrine program in the world, and blah, 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 blah. And to find out that I had just been chasing the freaking wind. And there wasn't a single thing that I knew that was related to the reason this woman had become disconnected from her own body, and that a cell within her body was now an existential threat to her own existence. I have no idea what went wrong there. I have no idea what upstream happened. So the last 15 years has been my journey into asking those deeper questions.
What landed at that point when that feeling come down? Is there any kind of breaking down of Zach at that point?
Depression.
Move forward? Yeah, okay.
Major depression. I suddenly was just lost. I was already exhausted. I've been working insane hours and for years and years, and you're I think professions of all types are good at this, but I think the two professions that have absolutely perfected the exhaustion of the human spirit is farming and pharmacy.
I was going to say law as well, because some of the adrenal studies that I've looked at, they look at law students and med students because of the intensity of that before walking into, and I guess the debt that pursues that as well, right?
Yeah, and this is me being a bias as a doctor over the lawyers that I know, but certainly the hours can be intense with law, and depending on what part of law, you might find yourself in a similar situation where you've got life and death in the balance. I can imagine if you're litigating or defending, death row or something like that, you have the same level of intensity. But both the farmer and the physician have a situation where you wake up every single day and are tasked with the responsibility of making life happen.
Yeah, and you really unpack it. What originally perhaps going into it was about the health of those systems.
Yeah, and it should be about the health of the system, but what you're equipped with when you're trained into a pharmaceutical model of chemical farming, or you're trained into a pharmaceutical mindset of chemical disease management, is that one of these chemicals is going to fight off the disease that's attacking your crop. So now you're in a daily experience of warfare, and you're trying to kill the disease agent every day. And so you wake up and you rush to the ICU, figure out which bacteria are growing in which patient and what antibiotics do I need to go into, get the arsenal going. On the farm field, which weeds are growing, which nutrients are going deficient. So you got this constant like ICU care going on a farm field or in the hospital that's taking you so far from what your goal was, which was to create health as a doctor or create a healthy crop as a farmer. Your toolbox doesn't even allow you to do the simple thing that you thought you were out to do. And so the whole table gets reversed on you, and all you're participating in is death. And so you're no longer facilitating life on a farm. You're no longer facilitating life in a home. You're simply the arbiter or the referee or the coach on the field of disease. And that is just a never-ending battle. And it's absolutely takes you to a state of exhaustion that you can't even fathom, really, I think, in any other industry. But that's why the suicide rates are higher in farmers and physicians than any place else out there. Is that I think we've been put into a false sense of responsibility to manage life, and then we're given a package of tools and resources and expertise in disease. And no matter how good you are at managing disease, you can never create health. And so this is the trap of it. And so the moment she asked that question, I realized I was in the trap. And I was like, the trap sprung at that moment, or the trap had long ago been sprung. And I realized I was in the trap,
Yeah.
And so I was a stuck animal. And for the next year, I really, really suffered,
Well, because then you're in an environment that you've woken up to.
every single day you're seeing it more. Yeah. Like, oh my God,
Amplified,
we're
right?
all doing it. Like, and we're all stuck in this thing. And it's a $5 trillion machine in the United States. Globally, it's a $9 trillion machine. The U.S. military is I just saw the headline today. The Senate just approved our new military defense budget at $890 billion this year, which is $90 billion more than last year. That's a lot of war. That is a lot of child sacrifice that we're motivating and arbitrating as a military. But 890 billion pales to 4 trillion in our American healthcare system right now. And so 5-6 times larger than the entire military is our current war on health.
Dangerous position to get into, because
it's the end of a civilization.
If that's the most profitable, let's say,
it is by
organization in the world, is that industry. What does that lead to for health?
It leads to the annihilation of a planet, not only the species, because at that point, the only way that you have economic growth is more disease. And so now there's absolutely zero incentive for a government of any ilk to create health in their population, because if they start creating health, they start losing the golden egg that we have birthed in this abstract state of separation from nature. And so a global 9 trillion, I think it's higher than that now. 9 trillion was an old number, but globally you're probably around 12 to $15 trillion in total disease management. And if that's, 7 times bigger than the entire, global armies, which have always been the largest business any empire does, is always their military. And so our war on life has become dwarfed our war on other nations. And so right now we are in this stuck state of, we have to keep stimulating the war on disease if we're to keep these economies afloat that have gotten so far in debt because they're abstract realities that are rotting at their core. And so we're stuck in proliferating disease right now, and the United States is winning the game. Like, that's why we have the biggest economy in the world, is we have the most expensive healthcare disease management system in the world. So we are still number one. If that disease management went away because we suddenly, replaced our current food system with healthy food,
if you're financially incentivized to do that,
we will economically collapse and have to rebuild.
Yeah.
And so that's a lot to ask a nation of, like, are you willing to collapse so that your grandchildren can actually stay alive? And to date, the answer has been no. We're too afraid to do it. We're too afraid to let go of our power as an economic, demigod in this world. How do we surrender to that? And the answer is, disease has to enter our own household. Until disease enters every single household, the change will not occur. The empire will not be willing to let go of its control. It's actually very reminiscent. I don't know why this is coming to mind so strongly right at the moment, because I don't remember the story perfectly, but in Scripture, in the Hebrew Scriptures, there's the account of Moses, trying to lead the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt, and the Pharaoh keeps saying, "Okay, yeah, I'll let you guys go," and then he keeps changing his mind. And then there's the 7 plagues, I think it is, that Moses calls in on Egypt, and there was the locusts and the things, and finally it's the death of the child in there, the oldest child or whatever in every household. And then Pharaoh finally lets them go. But it took every household experience the death of a child before that it was willing to let go of the power of control of slavery, of slavery over another. And I think, be it the British Empire, the United States, the Russian oligarchy, the Chinese, Communist Party, all of these things have a strangle grip on their people right now. And you can feel revolution in the air. The Chinese people aren't going to tolerate this much longer, because they're, clamped down worse than any time in history, perhaps. There's the human spirit is nature, and you can't contain nature at that level of, departure from human civil liberties and freedom and creativity and curiosity. It's being stripped from a whole, 1.2 billion people.
95% of our evolution.
Exactly. I mean, you just can't stop nature from evolving. No. It's impossible. And so whether it be the U.S. government and the chaos we're in with this election coming up in November, or the Chinese Communist Party, or I mean, literally, it's every single country that has any sort of economic standing in the world right now built that through an extractive, destructive, slave labor model. Every one of them, all the way back to as far back as our histories go. Egypt, you can go to the pictographs there, and you'll find that slaves were brought in to grow food. It's like, yeah, every empire has built itself on slave labor, and today we tend to call it, like supply chain is the fancy word for slavery today. Mm-hmm. But the word supply chain means that you aren't willing to take the sacrifice to
one of those words in that, right?
The chain is the word. So the supply chain is the slavery, slave chain of old, and it's being meted out at a level so much grander than any slave trade ever did. The United States as a single economy, or Europe as a single economy. China, these economies have had to enslave millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people to create supply chains so that there can be an ever-increasing sense of comfort and wealth and all that makes us feel good about the homes we live in and makes us feel more comfortable in our separation from nature.
Which keeps patching up the wound.
We're palliating the wound with consumption at the cost of global slave labor, which requires constant military engagement to stimulate the capacity to enslave others. It's always taken a military to create slaves. And so the U.S. military or the G8 or whatever it is, these are militaries that are churning away to make sure that we maintain slavery so that we can maintain the drugs, our consumptive behaviors, all that are helping us survive the belief that we've been kicked out of nature. So we're getting now to the point where there's a death in every home. So we're at the end of the plagues.
Or there's also infertility spiking, so there isn't even a birth in the home.
They can't birth them, and we're losing our children to cancers and everything else. United States, you can go to Texas Children's Hospital down there in Houston and just be devastated by the scale of it. We've built a whole 6-tower system. It looks like a city in and of itself, skyscrapers built to house children with cancer, or autoimmune diseases, horrible allergy situations. Like, our kids cannot survive, and they're dying so young. And so the scourge of our separation from nature is now 1 degree of separation of every household. There's not a household in the world that doesn't have some relative or close loved one that's not suffering the consequences of separation from nature and therefore disease, either in our Alzheimer's and dementia patients and the elderly, or our attention deficit, autism children, and cancer kids on the other end. And so the pain that we should feel is just beyond. Like, you can't believe what we've done to ourselves, what we've done to our children, what we've done to the children of our neighbor just to make ourselves feel better. We'll radicalize our children to kill your children. We're doing that on a scale never seen before. And it's just coming back from the Kogi, and you get these stories down there in South America of like the Inca and the Aztecs, and there was child sacrifice once a year. There was child sacrifice, and it resolved the energy of the conflict and all this. And it sounds horrible. Like, you mean people actually got into a stadium and watched a child sacrifice? That's like beyond our comprehension. And what we do today is send hundreds of millions of children into gladiator-like experiences of modern warfare to kill each other at 18 or 20 years of age, to kill each other in the name of their God or the name of their country or the name of their economy or whatever it is. And somehow we're justifying that that's reasonable while, the Aztecs were unreasonable. But who's doing the greater harm? Who's actually sacrificing
on the scale of which it's occurring?
Yeah. And so I don't understand the dimensions of, what's happened in the past. I don't even know if we know history very accurately. I mean, actually, all I know is we don't know history well. But the glimpses we get, we're so quick to cast judgment on our own history. When in fact, again, I think maybe we all signed up to be the cataclysmic threat to nature so that enough stress would occur so that a planet would rebirth at this moment. And in its rebirth, that planet will reset the vibration of a universe that's about to go into the 13th dimension, which is super interesting because the 13th dimension is apparently where a universe will connect to the multiverse. So anything less than 13th dimension is limited to its own black hole environment. But at the moment it goes into the third dimension, it's now interconnected. And there's theories that the place at which we connect into the multiverse, the vibration at which we connect, is going to be determined by the chakra system of our universe at that moment. And so is it possible that a bunch of souls have rushed to this planet to retune a heart chakra of a universe that's about to connect to the multiverse to determine over the next eons what vibration is this planet or this universe going to connect to? Is it going to connect to a high vibration of ecstatic pleasure, or is it going to connect to a state of suffering? That's a pretty interesting model. That to me starts to maybe as grandiose as it sounds, and maybe as narcissistic as it sounds, is maybe we're that important. But it speaks to why we're left here, because I believe we're surrounded by intelligent beings from all over the universe. And human minds have called them angels or entities or aliens or extraterrestrials. We've got a bunch of fancy labels for these things, but there's just entities all around us that are in higher vibration, maybe similar vibrations, maybe lower vibrations, but we are surrounded by intelligence that predates our planet, let alone our species probably. So why is all of that intelligence around us and not annihilating us? Why haven't we been wiped out? If we're this horrible to one another and we're this horrible to one of the most precious, jewels in the universe, why are we being left persistent in our wounded behavior?
Yeah. It leads us to questioning the messenger and what are the messages,
Is it because the universe needs us to create the wound deep enough that there will be a big enough healing?
The pendulum has to swing that far.
And the deeper you injure, the more transformational work it sets us up for. The deeper the extinction, the more extreme the jump is between life before extinction and life after extinction. There's been many small extinctions on the planet that are probably innumerable. So we kind of map the big ones, like the last one 55 million years ago, asteroid hits the Earth. Some people think it was a nuclear event. Who cares? But something covered the planet with dust. And a thick layer of dust choked out all of the topsoils of the planet, and we lost about 87 to 92% of life on Earth, including the dinosaurs famously. When you take that many organisms, and we're talking about millions of species, especially when you start considering the microbiome at the time, we had deeper topsoil levels on the Earth 55 million years ago than any other time in its history. So you're at the pinnacle of vital soils that were producing ferns that were larger than houses. The palm trees, were exploding with vitality. And so just the nutrient density of this planet probably has never been before or since equated or reached. And so we just were this vital force. And then this extinction level thing goes and you lose 90% of all those species. And when you put species under a stress state, they start misspelling their genes. And then they exude those genes outside of themselves. So they can send it off in these little packages called exosomes. In modern scientific talk, we call them viruses, but viruses are simply long-distance communication tools for the potential of the future. And so the genome as a planet is the genetic viruses and all the exosomes, all this. This is the genetic possibility of what comes next. And the more stress you put on an organism, the faster they start kicking out these new possibilities of genetic sequences. And so what this Earth was calling for, and maybe what the entire universe was calling for at this moment, is, can we get a species in here that will see itself separate from nature, and in so doing put such a massive stress state on this that it would go away? But why didn't it just be an asteroid or something like that? Maybe it's because we're supposed to participate in the rebirth too.
Yeah.
And so there's this one little sliver of chance left as we come into this state of zero sperm counts by 2050. We're just a couple decades away from the 0 point of just complete annihilation. But is there this sliver of opportunity that we have, and I really feel it in my soul that this is the truth, is we weren't coming here to annihilate for the purpose of annihilation. We're coming here to annihilate for the purpose of participating in the rebirth, becoming the mother, becoming the father in some ways. Can we really embody the creation of a new universe, really, in some ways? Because when we set this universe back into motion with a new vibration, it's not like it ever stopped, but it's currently in a vibration that it's been in since its origin 15 billion years ago, maybe. And so billions and billions and billions of years of a single vibration, and now it's about to switch into this 13th dimensional thing. And depending on where we strike the chord with the heart chakra, our planet may be sitting very uniquely at a distance from the core of the universe to set up a vibrational frequency within a chakra center or energy center within our galaxy. And so is it possible that we're here to trigger this cataclysmic shift within a universe that needs to connect to the multiverse? And so maybe we're actually being nursemated by all these intelligent species around them, the angels and the rest, as we might call them. Is it possible that we're surrounded by intelligence of nature, intelligence of these cosmos, intelligence of whatever we call God or the divine? Is it possible that we are being so cared for in our death that we would be part of the rebirth?
The Nat Life Pod is a platform for conversation to help close the gap between wellness as an industry and wellness as a state of being. This is also what underpins our online community, the Nat Life Tribe. The Nat Life Tribe is a growing health and natural lifestyle community where we offer weekly natural movement sessions, breathwork sessions, and hold a check-in safe space for the community to share, connect, and raise a hand if help is needed. This is a great space to embody the practices that we often speak to on the Nat Life Pod. Full details on how to join the Nat Life Tribe are in the show notes. I hope to see you moving, breathing, and sharing in there real soon. Begs the question, doesn't it? Because I can't help but then think about like the indigenous culture piece. So 4% of the world's population being indigenous, look after 80% of the world's biodiversity.
Exactly.
Have you unpacked Tiwai yet, which is Bruce Parry's documentary? Because there's two tribes in that really stick out, and one is the Penan and the other is the Parai. And the Penan, they show how through logging and things that are occurring on an environmental scale they're in Sarawak, right? How it's reached devastation. They're being forced off their lands, and they're now living in what would be communal living, like barns that they have to live in. And so when Bruce originally visits them way back on a documentary called Tribes, it's why he wants to go back and shoot this new documentary, because he was amazed at how connected they were deeply to their environment. They are nature. They're really super present, to a point where he just felt, even though all the work he'd done, that he was an awkward Englishman in the environment, you know. But then revisiting them, they're in this communal home, and suddenly they have the distractions of the permanent shelter. It's like, I can't find this, I can't find that, I've got to put things in their backpack, and they're spraying insects when at one point they are nature. They are even in the frequency of the insect, right, at that point. So then you can see that disconnect coming in, and then he visits the Pariah. Now they don't have a word for past or future; they're that present and moving through a landscape so present that they have messages that come through from the spirits of the forest, right? And their territories are now shrinking as well. So what they're having to do is now start the cusp of hunter-gatherer to agricultural. So they're now started farming, which means now they're already controlling nature. And they speak to all of a sudden that the forest, the spirits have stopped talking to them, because now they have taken that step where we're now controlling this system rather than being part of it, you know? So I guess it's being part of that bigger picture. How does that communication of we're here at this moment to start this process, or have signed up for this, and why is it that those indigenous cultures, or certain indigenous cultures, are still living the same way that they've been living for thousands of years?
Because of the lifeline, they're the umbilical cord, I believe.
Yeah, okay.
You know, and so those groups are, and there's many First Nations in the United States that kind of hold this history, is that these last 5 generations that have been so, you know, hunted into near genocide, those generations, there was only one mandate, is to survive. Nobody expects you to be healthy. We know that you're traumatized. Nobody expects anything. At the soul level, their guides, their ancestors are not expecting anything other than the request to just hold on. Just hold on another generation or two, because we are part of the rebirth. Mm-hmm. And the codes that you hold in your blood, even if you can't even remember your native language, the codes you hold in your genetics are the codes of peace for the new world. They are the codes of reconnection. So just hold on a little bit longer. And so if anybody's listening to this and is coming, you know, in from, you know, a community that's highly traumatized by global colonialism and the slave labor of supply chains and everything else, if that's where you're at, just know that we recognize the beauty of your survival, that you have held on through the trauma, that you've held on through the heartbreak of loss that is even just too much for a human mind to comprehend. If you have held on, it's because you're carrying the codes of the new earth, and this 4% of earth that's currently living in an indigenous culture. Remember, 100% of humans are indigenous. We're all made of the earth, but 96% of us are living a culture and a personal belief system that we're separate from nature. So the 4%, what does that really say? It's not that they're Indian or they're, native or any of these words that have been thrown around over the years. It means that they are living connected to their reality still. And so we have this little tiny 4%, of biologic humanity holding on to the umbilical cord, to the original codes of our potential. And so this is why I think you see this surge right now that's happening. The amount of awareness of indigenous wisdom right now around the world is not in hundreds of years has this been seen. We are seeing respect, reverence, engagement of indigenous wisdom lines. This plant medicine resurgence that's happening. Ceremony is coming back into the Western mind. If I want to sit in ceremony, I want to sit around a fire. I want to have the experience of these original vibrations, these original truths.
Yeah.
And this group of 50 that flew in around the world to join me for this experience with the Colombian 4 indigenous cultures there, we sat there in just dumbstruck awe of the simplicity of truth. And it took day after day of deconstructing the complexity of the problems that we believed were there to find out there's no complexity in the human condition. There's only simplicity of you are nature, and you are being welcomed back into nature. And if you will take that invitation, the healing will be so rapid you can't even imagine. You'll even forget why that you have or had disease or how it occurred, because it's so obvious that there is no dis-ease in the universe or in nature itself. There's only ascension. It doesn't mean that friction isn't good. It doesn't mean that extinction isn't good. So it can look like we're in a problem or there's bad stuff happening, but in fact that's just nature putting enough stress on herself to iterate again and adapt again and become more beautiful. Those ferns and palm trees that dominated the planet, or the reptiles in the form of the dinosaurs, they gave way to a diversity of life that could not have been imagined.
And here we are now.
Birds, mammals, whales, the whole thing. Humans, all of that came out of the pressure of extinction. And so now we're repeating that pattern, and I get excited to think about where life jumps to. I was just hiking the coastline of England last night with Richard Rudd. We had the most spectacular evening together. He's the source of the gene keys codes and all that. And so we had this incredible journey together of just telling each other, without humans around, without culture around, we were able to go into the state of just being really honest with some of the visions and meditations that we've had in our personal lives, and the way in which those wove together into this alternate, reality, or this deeper truth reality last night for me just was such an encouragement of like, we actually already know. We actually already know that it's a game of nature. There is no evil. There is no good and bad. There's only disconnect or reconnect. And when we reconnect, everything had its purpose. There was the polarity of our behavior, whether it be deemed something destructive or deemed something constructive. You couldn't have had the constructive without the destructive. The polarity was necessary. The light and dark has to be present in equal amounts. And so the human mind loves to create a judgment tree of what's good, what's bad, what's a little bit better, what's a little bit worse, and then we shine that on each other, and we just hate each other. We're radicalizing our children to go kill somebody else's children. We do that because we have this belief that what we see is real, and what we see is better than what we see over there, and it's just all false. Everything we see is false, and so we've got to just begin to feel the universe instead of see the universe. And then we'll come into our full creative potential, I think, and we can become part of that trajectory of life emerging from this extinction stress rather than disappear into it.
Yeah, I can't help but go back to that piece again, because if I view those connected to nature, our nature communities, who, if we think of the biodiversity piece, so if we were 200,000 years as hunter-gatherers, let's say, farming drops in about 10,000 years ago, depending on geographic location, could be 6,000 years in the UK. already looking at the pariah and how the impact as that has by not being connected to their environment in a very short window of time, the impact you can see psychologically on them, emotionally on them. There you see the wound, right? But you see it in such real time because it's just happening. Whereas it's happened over such a long period of time for us, right? But in that, this brings us to biodiversity of the soil, I guess, but also diversity of many things, like within the microbiome could be movement. Like we need movement for the microbiome. Microbiome needs movement through us. And yet there they are moving through a landscape that's completely biodiverse. So their movement is very diverse, right? Whereas our movement's lacking diversity again. Our food is lacking diversity. And our needs, we could say, are we don't have the diversity within our own needs, right? And we sacrifice so much. So it could be something that we all sacrifice many needs for, which is shelter now, right? So, which has created more competition and scarcity. And how diverse those soils must have been, or again, simply we can, through cultural appropriation, not appreciation, not appropriation, visit those indigenous cultures and see how diverse those environments are. And then look to communities, of course, of how diverse their movement is. Then look to communities, how diverse their microbiome is. And we can look to some cultures, same way they've been living for tens of thousands of years again, that have, a third more microbiome than we do. And some species we've never even detected. So in that process of going from that diversity then into farming, let's say, already there's a manipulation of that system. So then there's a manipulation of the soil. So if we work towards a timeline of where we are today, how much we've lost. So for me, I'm always obsessed by movement. So it's thinking, moving through a landscape, I would have been running, jumping, lifting, carrying, throwing, defending, climbing, catching, carrying, swimming even, depending on geographic location again. And then if we then go, right, there's a divergence, suddenly some of us become more agricultural. And then that agriculture then leads to a real minimizing of those movements that might just be pushing and pulling. Or what does throwing look like all of a sudden? And suddenly it becomes very specialized. And it's in that specialization again, almost like reductionist, that we move forward then into what I call like the human zoo that we exist in. It's like a zoo without cages in a way, right? We worse than being in a zoo where you recognize the cages, we no longer have them. It's a bit from Ishmael there. But it's the diversity piece. So then, of course, we are then less experienced at witnessing diversity even. So it plays out even on a cultural level, So the diversity in our gut then plays out with the lack of diversity. Then the, let's call it the scarcity. So the scarcity even within our soils, we're then consuming foods that then have scarcity, right? We've got scarcity of movement to find the foods even. And therefore, also, because of that scarcity, we then create, I have to hold on to these food groups, then I create competition. So it's all tied in, it feels to me, is that moment when we transitioned into farming. Does that make sense? Yeah. But that's not to, of course, berate farming, because again, that's such an important piece to recognize in this regeneration of the soils and the planet, is to get it back to that real biodiverse piece when we were moving through landscapes. But of course, that's a huge shock for the brain to think, what do I have to give up all of this?
Yeah, I think that specialization thing, it strikes me that it plays really nicely into this original wound that we're not enough, And so farming, was necessary so that we could all specialize in other things, right?
Yeah.
And so the specialization, and for a farmer to be able to have a plow that could then dig up a larger plot of ground so that they were suddenly managing more food than they could eat, well, that's a new opportunity for other people not to grow what they were immediately growing before that. And so now you have a few people that say, oh, yeah, I'm not going to grow it. Sheila's doing a great job up the road of growing food. I'll buy it from her. And so you go through this little moment of that person now has an enormous amount of time. What are they going to do? And they're going to go specialize in being a jewelry maker with shells on the beach or whatever it is. And so we went through this process of specialization. And it does strike me that why do we want to be special? It's because we don't think we're worthwhile. So because we got separated at the mind heart level from source, that we're now trying to prove that we're special. And so the specialization and the hyper specialization, my specialty in medicine ended up being a single protein called CoopTF1. I was a world expert in this one protein. There was maybe only 6 other people in the world that even knew this protein or cared about it. 6 others out of 8 billion. So that's some hyper subspecialty that our current medical world is
Yeah.
encouraging us to do. Well, if you're not the expert in something, if you're not number one in your field, then you're not worthwhile. And so go get a grant to study your one protein and then try to tell the world why that's important. I can guarantee you none of you are ever going to hear about CoopTF1 because it is not important to the human condition. Sure, it regulates cancer and all this stuff, but it is not important to who you are, how you got here, where you're going. And so this hyper specialization is because we have this such deep fear that we're not worthwhile. And so for me to have to pursue for decades the belief that I was number one of understanding a protein so that I would be important. I mean, talk about how far can you get from being a child? Because a child simply wakes up and bees the child. And of course, they attract so much love to them that everybody can't wait to feed them and do the things and take care of them, provide everything they could possibly need because they're just a present being. When did we lose that? Early on, obviously. So that's our encouragement. And I think if you're listening to this, you're like, well, this all sounds very interesting, but how the hell does that play out in my own life? Like, what are we going to do? And I think the encouragement is you are loved.
Yeah.
And so find out how loved you are. Find out what it feels like when nature decides to grow a mint plant for you and feed you through that mint plant. Mint's bulletproof. You can put a mint out in the ground in your backyard, or if you don't even have a yard, you got a pot in the window. You can't kill mint. And one of you are going to kill it, and you're going to feel like you're, a horrible failure. Just try again. Mint is just this wonderful plant that just gives and gives and gives, and it's so medicinal, and it's fragrant, and it's yummy. You make tea out of it. You can do all kinds of things. So simple. Boil some water and put that fresh mint in there, and blow your mind about what happens in your mouth and then in your brain when that hits your neurochemistry. So start in a small way, bringing nature back into your life. If it's just a pot of mint and your first pot of fresh mint tea, do that tonight. So get the mint seeds or go get the mint seedling from your local nursery or whatnot, and start the journey into nature in your own home. And realize, you know what, I am loved. So much that nature would create the opportunity for me to actually be able to produce through absolutely no effort. Sprinkle a little water in there once a week into your mint plant. Like, it's just so little that nature is asking to give you so much, and really what she's asking is to acknowledge that you are special by just waking up on the pillow and not knowing anything, just being everything. Nature knows you're capable of being all of nature. You are holding more nature within your colon than any other colon of any other species on this planet. The human colon was recently recognized to be the most diverse ecosystem on the planet. So do you think nature worked for 4 billion years to create a colon like yours that would hold more nature so that more of nature could speak through you and create through you and be you, and she wouldn't love you? She wouldn't provide for you? That's our journey next, is like, oh my gosh.
Colonizing the colon.
Of course. Yeah, exactly. And
That's the podcast. There you go.
And so it's just so exciting that, wow, if we just lean into the possibility that we are loved, and you're afraid you don't know how to garden or produce your own food, it's because you haven't leaned in to see what nature wants to provide you. So lean in and say, well, maybe I do have connection to the knowledge, connection to the beingness of growing my own food. Maybe it's a tomato plant next spring instead of just the mint plant in the window. And maybe it's a squash plant next summer. And maybe it's a watermelon in the fall for the kids, or a pumpkin vine. Start into it and find out, my God, nature's just trying to give me all of this stuff. Nature's trying to show me how much I'm loved. And for that, I don't need to be a specialist. How cool to be a generalist. I'm just generally loved. What are you a generalist in? I'm just generally loved by nature all the time, and nature's trying to bless me all the time. And the blessings I've had in my recent weeks, the beautiful interactions I've had with other humans, the beautiful interactions I've had with nature in Colombia and now in the UK, and I was in New Zealand before that. Like, I'm just doors off beauty, like the gifts and riches, and yet I can find myself feeling guilty about anything. Like, how can I have any guilt, shame, or fear about anything? Because nature's just done that for me. I have lived evidence of how precious my journey is to nature, because it wants to bring all of the perfect experiences: intimacy, conversation, food, water, swimming in 15-degree freezing water. these are just, you can't get more exuberant than nature's trying to be for you.
And it's free.
It's
It's
free.
that profound on our health and well-being, right? That reminded me of the planting, like the mint. I was invited to a school. It's quite progressive. It's called Bedales. And the woman Victoria invited me, became the new head of their younger years. It was called Dunanny. And it's about rewilding the kind of environment, or the kids within the environment. And one of the first things I suggested was putting up one of those living walls, but each kid, when they join the school, get given a plant and it's in a pot, and that's their thing to nurture. And what also dropped in was the study in Finland, and they rewilded the school playgrounds of these kindergartens. Yep. Have you had that one?
Yeah.
Such a short window of time. Like within 28 days, I think, the study, and they noticed a massive shift within. Of course, we're talking about the being part of it and the connecting to it, but in terms of health and well-being, what it was doing for their microbiome, improving this diversity piece, right?
Yeah, it takes so little nature to rewild the human experience, really. And so that happens at the microbiome level in a matter of minutes, really. And so as soon as you go out in the garden for the first time and you dig a hole, and try not to put on the rubber gloves and the boots and all that, but go out barefoot with a hand trowel and get your hands in there and feel what it feels like under your fingernails, feel what it feels like on your fingertips when you've got soil on there, and then bend down and smell that hole before that soil is separate from the life force, and smell what life force smells like in the humus layer of soil. It's mind-bogglingly, intoxicatingly beautiful. The smell of fresh soil is just insane on the neural membranes. The neurology it's a full plant medicine journey right there. So get in there and get in it and rewild your neurology, your
whole being,
psychology, your spirituality. Just get it wilded.
I had a profound thought around that, because originally on this whole journey of rewilding the human, myself in that experience, when I started the barefoot journey, or being in nature barefoot, it was very much about the sensory, like thinking about sensory genomics in a way, or neuroplasticity. And if I'm moving through a landscape with this sensory experience in my feet, what that's doing for rewiring my brain. And it wasn't until really when I first come across you, was the influence of the microbiome. And then thinking, well, because again, we gain so much ourselves through being barefoot, the microbiome, but also what does the ground receive from us? Because we think about animals in a state where they are self-medicating. So Isabella Tree from the Napa State I visit, and Isabella Tree has the Napa State, and she talks to these breeds, the ancient breeds that they have roaming the land. And from a horticultural perspective, she explains that, if you trim a rose bush, it will grow back thicker, And these grazing animals with their salivary enzymes are communicating to the plant communicates to the soil, and the soil communicates back to the plant and gives the animal almost what it needs within that self-medication. It's growing back faster and vaster in that. So we can often think about perhaps the microbiome, we might influence it by our foods, and we're understanding more about the air in our environments. But do you think there's more of a communication, that's what I'm trying to get to, I guess, between human and soil? Like if we were to get our hands in the soil and we are actually growing something through our interaction with the ground, would that food source perhaps give us more to heal us in a way, what we might be lacking of?
That's that. If I have any expertise left, that's it. So I left the university in 2010 and started a nutrition center for trying to reverse chronic disease through food. And in a couple of years of doing that, found myself realizing that the soil science and food science, well, namely the food science of the last few decades, wasn't working as it should. So that got us studying soil science and conditions and nutrient density in the plants and all that. And that took me on this slippery slope right down into the soil itself. And in a 90-page white paper, discovered a white molecule. My colleague William pointed it out and said, I had a name for it. And this is humic fulvic compounds and all this. And what I saw was not anything really related to soil, but I saw the medicine I used to make. And so it looked a lot like the chemotherapy I had designed. And the idea that there was medicine inside of soil was radical in my brain. It just was a nuclear bomb, because for thousands of years we've been looking for plants that had medicines in them, and Chinese medicine, Chinese herbals, like 9,000 years we've been doing that. But the idea that soil maybe even had something more potent in it than the plants would produce kind of made sense. Like, well, how would the medicine end up in the plant? Like, hey, where did that come from?
What's the...
Well, it must be coming from the bacteria and fungi and the system down there. And so I think the most intelligent medical system that we have is actually in the soil, not in the plants. Each plant can give you a representation of different aspects of the soil medicine, but soil has it all. It has to. And so this has been our effort. And so we started extracting complex carbon molecules from fossil soil, going back 60 million years ago to these plateaus of fossilized soil that were in the desert southwest of the United States. We were able to isolate the soils that the dinosaurs roamed on. And if those were the most complex soil systems, then that must have the highest medicinal qualities of the world. So we started extracting carbon molecules and putting them into the aqueous states, and then through some of my biochemistry background, we started combining the idea of getting not just the medicine but the communication to work. And so these molecules are not just capable of delivering medicinal qualities; they are actually the communication network of biology. And so, as a family, the science refers to these as redox molecules. Redox is a consolidation of the words reduction and oxidation. Reduction is the donation of electron. Oxidation is the absorption of electron or a receipt of electron. So when you have redox chemistry, is basically the description of a complex liquid circuit board that runs in biology that allows information to travel. And so just the same as your CPU chip in a computer is made of lots and lots of different wire pathways, the redox chemistry is doing that in more of an ethereal state. It doesn't need a physical wire to run through. It can do it through water. It can do it through liquid state of a cell. And so it's ultimately the wireless communication network of life is what we kind of isolated from these soil systems. And so it was a new concept that there could be wireless communication network in cell systems. So we created a dietary supplement line called Intelligence of Nature, because the intelligence of nature has
that's
to be
what ION... Okay.
That's what ION stands for. And so intelligence of nature was the realization that nature is producing the communication network that allows the coordination of biology to occur. One species of bacteria to function with a fungal species or whatnot. That has to be a cooperative, non-fiat language, right? And so it can't be the nation language of bacteria. If bacteria can't really exist in a healthy soil system without an equal balance to protozoa and fungi and the rest, well, then it has to be a transcontinental, trans-species communication network, and that's what has been developed in soil. So soils hold the trans-species communication network, and you can't imagine the mind blow we had when we added that back to human cells in a petri dish. Because to that point, not just in my laboratories at the University of Virginia, but all laboratories globally have been studying human cells in isolation, away from nature.
Yeah.
And so our entire understanding of human physiology and disease is based on the belief that we're an isolated species. And therefore, we don't believe in healing, because you cannot heal in isolation. You can only increase entropy. That's the second law of thermodynamics. Any system left in isolation increases its entropy. Any system that's witnessed and connected increases syntropy or order. And so the fact that we've only understood human physiology in the law of entropy or increasing amounts of chaos, it's why we believed, and as doctors, we never told our patients they could heal, because we've never seen it under a microscope. We've only seen increasing levels of entropy. And so then we take these soil extracts and we put them under a microscope on human cells for the first time, and order is happening under the microscope. You see healing happening under a microscope. Cells that have been long removed from the human body suddenly start organizing three-dimensional tissue and start organizing protein synthesis at an excretion rate or a functional rate you can't imagine. So we were watching life literally explode out of petri dishes just because we were giving them back the soil systems of communication. And so it's been a real tingly experience as a scientist and a physician who set out on a career to try to help people, to realize I have no help for them but nature. How could I possibly supersede the birthplace of life itself, which is nature's communication network? And of course, the way that nature does it is not just give the communication network, it also provides in the same molecules the avenue for resource delivery.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is how a mycelial network works: is ion, the natural equivalent of these ion molecules, these intelligence of nature systems of carbon communication, are also carrying the nutrients. And so if you pour fertilizers and such in one corner of a farm, and you leave those soils undisturbed, the mycelial network will develop and then start distributing that fertilizer to any area within a kilometer or two that needs that resource. And so the information starts streaming around like, oh, that tree over there is deficient in manganese. Oh, that's right, we've got it over here. And so the communication sent up, we need manganese, and well, we've got manganese. And in just that process of communicating, it's already transited not just the information, but the resource. So nature has this extraordinary system of wireless communication and wireless delivery. It's better than Amazon, So,
Yeah.
like, this is the ultimate delivery system that as soon as the communication is established, the resources are there to be shared. And so it's a sharing economy on a scale you can't imagine as a human in scarcity model. But this is abundance that nature does. And so it's been pretty amazing. We put these products on the market in 2014 for the first time, started using them in my clinic in 2013. But to set a bottle of this in somebody's hand is just such a trippy thing, because the soil systems of the last 50 million years are not the soil systems of 60 million years ago.
No.
And so human biology, just a couple 100,000 years, has never seen the full potential of communication and resource management that this planet is capable of doing.
Mm-hmm.
So every time I've watched an autistic child grab one of those bottles, or adult with disease in their life, it gives me goosebumps, because that human is not just going to reconnect to nature. That human is about to have an experience that no human has had before, is connecting itself to a nature that went extinct 60 million years ago. And so
the intelligence of all life.
The intelligence of vitality that bursts forward in these individuals as soon as they start having this daily practice of a couple times a day, ingesting the intelligence of nature. The wackiest things happen, and certainly biology improves, but the weird thing is psychology and philosophy and spirituality shift. And so we see very often, it started in my clinic kind of subtly, because I wasn't expecting it to happen, but 6 months into daily contact with ancient soil, a woman comes in a clinic and she just looks like a different person. New hairdo, makeup's gone, she's radiant, appearance, and she comes in, she's like, I just, left my job, and that has been torturing me for the last 20 years, and I just started the company I've always wanted to start. And a couple days later, another woman comes in, and she just looks like a different person, and she's been just ingesting ancient soil for 12 months, and I just left the abusive marriage that I've been in for 20 years, and I just left, and I started this new life, and I feel amazing, and my children are celebrating with me because they didn't even know I was this person. I didn't know I was this person, And so these life transformations were starting to come out of this, and it took years of that before I kind of started to put the dots together with my teams and everything else. So I think the soil's doing that.
Yeah.
I think you're creating a plant that's so nutrient dense suddenly, and in this human being is becoming so rich in its self-expression that it's starting to draw healthy boundaries. And as we drill down on the bioscience of this stuff, bizarrely, the first thing that happens at the microscopic level is the restoration of boundaries. And so it happens within minutes at the gut lining or the vascular lining or the blood-brain barrier. As soon as this communication network gets put into the cellular system of a gut lining, the gut lining's first instinct is, oh, wow, we are the boundary between the human and the non-human environments. And so we need to make more tight junctions. And so the cells start making tight junctions. Mm-hmm. Tight junctions are the Velcro that turn billions of gut cells into a single intelligent gatekeeper. And it's not a barrier, it's a gate. And the tight junctions can open up, let nutrients in, zipper back up, make sure that the toxins stay out. And so it's very interesting to me that just in the first few seconds, even, it only takes 60 seconds for this to start to occur at a gut membrane under a microscope. So give the communication network, and the gut immediately knows its primary function is to be a boundary, to be a healthy boundary event, so that somebody develops self-identity at the cellular level. And 6 months later, that woman has a new self-identity and is expressing herself with sovereignty and healthy boundaries and healthy processes. And so it's very compelling to me that nature, and shouldn't be surprising, that nature with degraded boundaries produces organisms with no boundaries.
Yeah.
And so what happened in the 1970s was pretty crazy as we started adding chemicals to our food and water system, soil, food, and water, started carrying glyphosate. And glyphosate is the most common herbicide on the planet now. We spray 4 billion pounds, over 2.2 billion kilograms of this single chemical into our global food system. And it's a water-soluble molecule, so it gets sprayed onto a farm field, but within minutes it's going into the water table and it's swept away in the next rain into the rivers, and now it's evaporating into the air and ends up in the clouds and the rain coming down. And there goes a plane spraying overhead.
Yeah,
maybe.
we got that. No, we're right. We're okay. We're okay. Everyone hold their breath for a moment.
Sorry.
Don't inhale that.
Don't breathe. And so the glyphosate is being sprayed globally at these immense levels, and it's gotten into our water system. So our fossil aquifers are now all contaminated with glyphosate. 85% of the rain that falls is detectable for glyphosate. 85% of the air we breathe is detectable for Roundup and glyphosate. And so we are literally have surrounded the entire biologic condition of planet Earth with this chemical. And what we've proven in our laboratory
is an anti-life chemical.
We have an anti-life chemical. And what does anti-life mean? The very first thing that chemical does when it hits a gut membrane or a vascular membrane or your blood-brain barrier or kidney tubules is to break the connections. And so it breaks the tight junctions. It breaks the boundaries. And so we're literally breaking the healthy boundaries of nature. And in that, we can see the healthy boundaries of the human psyche collapsing. And now we are all codependent, and we are all drugged, and we are all controlled so easily because we added something to our nature that destroyed our boundaries. And as soon as you give back fossil soils that have not, were not treated with any of these chemicals by a long shot, these are carrying information that our soils of today cannot carry because of the amount of herbicides, pesticides that we've put in. And when you put in these herbicides and pesticides into a soil system, they immediately knock down 80-90% of the biodiversity in the soil. And each bacteria and fungi is making a different carbon molecule. We call them carbon snowflakes. Each species makes 10 or 15 variants of the carbon snowflakes. You get hundreds of millions of species together, and now you have a fluent communication wireless network. And so our whole planet is losing the wireless network right now. And I think it's only by the grace of nature that she placed in her soil 60 million years ago an antidote, which is a communication network that can bridge us over this little gap in history where we've destroyed the communication network of a planet, and for it, it's slipping into extinction. And so we have this little bridge, this ancient soil, that's saying, can you see the truth? Can you see the information? Can you be empowered by the gifting of this information stream? And that gifting economy, I'll just touch on real quick, is really beautiful too, is these carbon molecules we've just discovered in the last few years that not only was it the communication network, we can put micronutrients, so nature dose nutrients back into the system, and these carbon baskets carry those into cells very effectively. And so currently our supplement market is like 50,000 units of vitamin D and 25 grams of vitamin C and all this mega dosing to try to get a little bit of that into the body when you're pooping out the vast majority of those supplements. And so what we've been able to show is that if you take curcumin, for example, liposomal curcumin, highest grade on the market, and you ingest that, there's none detectable in your urine over the next couple hours. If you will dissolve the curcumin in the intelligence of nature, within 30 minutes, you have 3,000 nanograms per milliliter of urine. And so you have this explosive biodelivery when you're using just tiny, tiny amounts. And of course, nature doesn't macrodose anything. She microdoses, but does it in such a form that it's carried and gifted to every cell so effectively that there's no waste. And so a gifting economy is much different than an extractive economy. And a gifting biology is much different than an extractive biology. What I mean by that is you actually are doing damage with megadose vitamins. This was proved in the Women's Health Initiative, largest human study done in longitudinally. It was over 125,000 women in study for over 20 years, a massive clinical trial. And they were looking at all kinds of different outcomes from that massive database that was created. And a lot of them were nurses and healthcare practitioners that were in the study. And so for that, they actually got pretty high levels of compliance with different, behavioral properties. But what they showed is that the women within that subset that were just taking daily multivitamins, not prescribed them, just they happened to be the subset that said, yes, I take a daily multivitamin, had a 9% increase in mortality for taking multivitamins. That's worse than smoking. And so the possibility that, because of our fear of scarcity, we go after these megadose vitamins, and in so doing, we insult the biology so greatly through stressing it from these, megadose, monocultures of vitamin D, vitamin C, and magnesium. You're megadosing things that actually should be nature dosed, and for the megadosing, you're losing the influence and the symphony of a complete diverse, periodic chart that should be dancing through your food every day. And so it's been a really interesting, humbling journey in this intelligence of nature exploration. Is like, wow, nature is so subtle in the way she moves and so effective because she knows exactly what you need. She's never going to waste anything on you. She's going to give you exactly what you need. Are you willing to be satiated ultimately?
Even receptive.
And receive it in the first place.
Yeah.
Are you willing to receive? And then once receiving, are you willing to be satiated? Are you willing to experience satiety?
Mm-hmm.
Because right now you're going to have to let go of all of the chemicals that you're interacting with as drugs to even be able to reach the sensation of satiety.
To feel, because you're numbed and dumbed away
You're
from
so
the very
numbed, you're so
sensation.
stimulated, you're overstimulated by your caffeines and your, all the extracts and the sugar and the things. And are you willing to take it all the way down to the base of what is nature willing to give me? What am I willing to receive? And how full can I feel from what nature has given me today?
Beautiful.
Big
thinking about the boundaries, Zach, earlier, because it's like we created a boundary. This is my fence. And then we have an issue with boundaries, and the boundary again disconnected us from what was that whole nature scene or the abundance of what that would have been, that then creates the scarcity again.
Exactly right.
I can't have you on here without talking about farmer's footprint, because it's such a huge thing, and I bow to you for that one, man. I think it's just so important. I have Jess coming on soon from Farmer's Footprint in Cornwall down here.
Great, wonderful.
I was at a talk and I was hearing you. We had someone else up on stage. Who was it? A young farmer. We were in London at the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the communication was around the suicide, because at some stage we would have had kind of community farming. And I think you voiced it as now we have kind of a satellite navigated tractor with a farmer on their own out in the field. And of course, surrounded by mechanical equipment. But again, it's what leads to that the situation that they're in that would lead someone to that process,
Yeah.
There's the disconnection from the community. I hear that.
It's isolation ultimately that drives these codependent natures with technology, and then the technology speeds the isolation. So we're in a death cycle of technological relationship. We develop technologies to palliate our disconnect from nature, and by using them, we accelerate and worsen our separation from nature. So certainly happening at the farmer level, certainly happening at the medical hospital level. Like, anybody can just go dumbfounded over what food gets presented to them in a hospital. Right? Yeah. It's like
mind blowing.
Nobody can think this is a good idea.
This is going to heal me.
These are sick people, and we're giving them this. Like, you just can't.
Let food be not your medicine.
Yeah, it is just let your food be your poison. It's just an amazing thing to witness. And in the same way, is it not amazing that farmers are taught to get into a hazmat suit and mix these toxic stews of 3 or 5 or 10 chemicals into these big sprayers, and then drive big mechanized tractors spraying the food of the future with biohazards that are all marked. Every bottle has got skull and crossbones on it. And so it's like, what? How did that happen? And ultimately, it's this vicious cycle of kicked out of nature, build technology to palliate that, and by so doing, destroy or go into the valley of death even further in our separation from nature. So that vicious cycle is inevitable. And Farmer's Footprint was our first project in a global project called Project Biome. And Project Biome understands that if we bring humans back into harmony with nature, we can stop being the destructive force and be a co-creative force with nature. And Project Biome is looking at a very simple system of restoration, which is rewilding rivers and coastlines with keystone species and indigenous cultures. And so indigenous cultures were universally pushed off high real estate, markets. And so coastlines, rivers, get them off there, and we'll put high dollar real estate in there. So we got to get indigenous cultural behaviors. Even if those peoples are gone, the culture needs to be restored. And so we need indigenous culture with indigenous plant species and indigenous animal species within these river and coastlines. So the first R is rewilding. The second R is regeneration. We need to understand that entire, not just food production, but all the agriculture that goes into our oils and for production of polyesters and plastics and fibers and all the things that we do for the textile industry, or all the things we're doing for the energy. So much of the corn or sugarcane being grown globally is being turned into ethanol for gas tanks and all of this. And so we're growing gasoline, we're growing plastic clothing, we're growing genetically modified feed for animal high intensity animal feed systems. So we're growing all this stuff in a way in which it destroys ecosystems and biodiversity at the soil and agricultural levels. So all of that needs to really reform, such that anybody involved in agriculture with any of these supply chain outputs needs to break out of that slave labor and start to reclaim sovereignty at the food level. And this is really about reconnection. What's the one word of regenerative agriculture? It's reconnecting the farmer to the consumer, reconnecting the consumer to the farm in such a way they become a co-producer. All of these things is really about it. So rewilding rivers, regenerative food and agricultural systems. And then the third R is about reconnected ecologic economies. And so we need to stop doing supply chains that go 5,000 kilometers, and we need to start realizing that the biosphere of each biosphere is trying to provide abundance for its local, economies.
Brings it back to that bare feet on the soil.
Bare feet on the soil, short supply chain, know your farmer, get involved with the farmer so he stops being in chains and actually engage, so that it becomes an artistic behavior of the farmer, being artistic and creative in their productivity rather than enslaved and chained to your desire for more caffeine and sugar and a few almonds. Like, get out of that mindset and just re-engage the farmer and see what creativity can come out of there. And suddenly you've got star fruit and mangoes, and you got abundance coming back as soon as allowed. So those three R's of rewilding, regeneration, and reconnecting economies is what Project Biome is focused on. But as we started kind of looking at across that whole system, it's like, actually, this is already happening. There's around 10 million nonprofits globally now. 4.5 million of those are working in the area of ecologic and social recovery. So if we have 4.5 million nonprofits running actively right now that are grounded in place, or have relationships with people and ecology on the ground, it's already there. The future that we already want is already here. It's just disconnected. And so in the same way that ion connects a biologic system of a complexity of a human body, we saw that Project Biome could begin this journey into being the connective tissue and really that wireless communication network that is not only giving communication between them, it's also delivering the resources. Because we have trillions of dollars that are now being committed to ecological recovery through carbon credits and all these abstract economies. We can tie that back to people on the ground that are doing the right thing locally if we create the one organism. So if we create one organism out of 4.5 million nonprofits and then connect them to trillions of dollars of funding that's already in place, this reality already exists. We already are the biggest social and ecological recovery machine ever built. This is humanity right now. We're already expressing it. We just need to connect. And as we get connection, we overcome the scarcity mentality and we create abundance. And so our first journey in that was Farmer's Footprint, because we realized that nobody believed that story. And nobody could imagine what that looked like.
What it would look like rolling it out.
And so we needed to figure out, well, how do people change? How do humans change their behavior? Because I was dumping enormous of science out there. I was telling everybody about glyphosate and tight junctions and Cancer Alley and all this stuff. And nobody was changing their behavior. My team was testifying in front of the Environmental Protection Agency year on year. And they just kept rubber stamping glyphosate over and over again. 196 peer-reviewed science journal articles from all around the world presented to the EPA saying this stuff causes cancer. We got to stop doing this. Rubber stamped again. So if the science doesn't change the minds of regulators or consumers, what does change it?
Yeah.
And a great quote was stumbled upon by one of our founding members, our filmmaker, Nicole Ragland, who's a phenomenal storyteller and just amazing being. But Nicole had this Japanese proverb that she found is that a farmer's footprint is the best fertilizer for a garden is the farmer's footprint. And just this witness of like, actually, if we touch the soil again, we begin the healing journey for not just us, but the garden itself.
Yeah.
The earth itself will beginning its thing. So Farmer's Footprint became the beginning of the story of humans touching earth again to start the healing journey. So the best fertilizer for the garden is the Farmer's Footprint. And so that was exciting. Well, if we just touch earth and we begin the process, but then how do you encourage others to do it? And again, I was using the science to say, hey, you get out in the garden, blah, blah, blah. Not much traction. Then Leah Marasovic, one of our incredible storytellers and filmmakers, started with one of our other founders, Jesse Gardner, and they started creating stories with farmers. And farmers started telling their stories out to the world of what happened to them personally and what happened to their family when they reconnected to the soil. And that became the fire. And so if you let the farmer tell the story of their own personal transformation, that's what inspires humanity.
Yeah.
The soil science just will never.
Well, they're making a connection to the farmer all of a sudden, aren't they?
They're making it relevant to the heart of mankind. My science doesn't make the connection to the heart of mankind well, but my heart does, and my story does. But farmer stories, it's the farmer story that was there. So there's a great, another quote that we don't know who to attribute it to at the moment because this has been quoted by many people now. But it says that humans are not made of cells; humans are made of stories. And so Farmer's Footprint has become a storytelling machine to help us become something different. We can become a different humanity. We start listening to the stories of the heart that reconnect to the soil systems. So Farmer's Footprint has been a real, I think, training ground for us as a global group. And we have teams in Australia and UK, New Zealand, other places that have been working through this and trying to figure out, what are the stories that are being told locally. And the beautiful thing that we have found is there is no ecosystem or biosphere within the planet that's telling the same story of regeneration as another. Because, of course, regeneration is going to look completely different in the northern throws here than it does down in Central Africa, that it does over in South America, that it does in Australia. The Farmer's Footprint is going to be unique. It's touching unique soil, and so the journey is going to be specific to people in place. And so we can't think that regenerative agriculture is just cover cropping with 7 species and stop plowing and stop spraying. That's regenerative agriculture. Nope, you still have a humanity that's extracting from its planet in a space that it believes it's been kicked out of. We have to solve the deepest wound if we're really going to see the needle move, because organic food didn't change anything. We've destroyed more earth since the advent of organic certification than ever before then. We've absolutely denuded more soil. We've desertified more of the planet through chemical agriculture than ever before, despite knowing that organic food is possible. And so regenerative food is, again, not going to change the needle if we don't start telling the story of the human and the heart behind it and the child who's now recovering from their autism because they've reconnected to nature. Those are the stories that we need to start reminding each other of. Like, it's not about moving the deck chairs on the way in which we produce food. We need to fundamentally change our self-identity, and we need to find those healthy boundaries to say, you know what, we are loved, and we do deserve at some level. We are being asked to receive nature in her abundance.
Yeah, beautiful. It again brings it back to that whole timeline for me when you speak of the rewilding, which is then looking at the coastlines and looking at the ancient breeds and bringing that back. Then we have kind of the regenerative farming and the community of that, bringing that together. Again, it's like pulling people out of the human zoo almost.
Absolutely.
We have to get them out the human zoo.
Rewild.
And then come into farming. And then farming with that diversity, bring it back to the cusp even of what that biodiversity must have looked like at some stage when we were hunter-gatherer through to agricultural.
And I would encourage everybody, the word farming can be intimidating because most of us are separated by a couple generations from the experience of farming.
Yeah.
And so the idea of just that pot of mint or the garden is where you can begin. So if you go to the Farmer's Footprint website, farmersfootprint.us has a bunch of connections, but you can go to any of them. Farmer's Footprint has a garden club that takes people who have never gardened, never planted a darn thing, into having a really verdant, experience in the backyard with your kids and everything else. So maybe just do the garden club for a month and just see what happens to your psyche. Because again, it's not really about growing food; it's about changing your relationship to nature. And so the concept of farming might feel very abstract to you or intimidating. So start small and start to reconnect and realize that we're all being called into this co-creative journey with nature, where we co-create in our backyards, we co-create. And the short goal that you could think of in a single word is biodiversity. How are you going to create more biodiversity in your day tomorrow? And the blue zones around the world have a big secret for us. Those places where humans tend to have this extreme longevity of living over 100 years with commonality, they've all shown us the path, which is always set an extra chair at the table for a stranger that might be able to share your meal with you. That's the cultures that live long, are those that are curious about who they can share their abundance with. And if you've ever gone into any indigenous culture,
egalitarian,
it's insanely generous. You got people that don't have food for tomorrow, but they'll go find it. And whatever they have today, they're going to give to you. And they'll probably take something off the wall and give it to you as well. They might take some piece of clothing off their own back and give that to you too if you said you liked it. Like the amount of generosity that comes out from a being that's present with nature and knows that everything's infinite, there's no end to the generosity. And it's scary how selfish and ungenerous we are as civilization has occurred, and how scared we are of giving anything away.
Yeah, the scars of that domestication seems to be that, right?
Yeah, scarcity across the board. So it's an invitation into a bounty of abundance in nature, and maybe we get to stay and play.
I love that. That feels like a very good place to finish, Zach.
Appreciate that.
Love you, man. So Ion, can we get a link for Ion? I think as we were discussing it, we keep rolling, by the way. I think let's maybe punctuate it in as a bit of promo in the pod. And at the beginning, we'll switch out Excel and we can put Farmer's Footprint in. I'd love to help support that, so we can put that in at the beginning of the pod. Yeah.
Intelligenceofnature.com is the website for all the information and science and all that. In the UK, if you're listening from this part of the world, or the EU, there's a couple ways you can get it. Amazon.uk carries it. Intelligence of Nature, Gut Support, easy way to find it on there. Yourhealthbasket.com is another distributor throughout the region. iHerb is another one that can go to about 120 countries around the world. But if you're local in the UK, I think the shipping will be cheapest probably through Amazon.uk or yourhealthbasket.com.
I know I've just said close this. I just had a thought about Ion, because there's the healing of the tight chains, right? And we have this notion of food being thy medicine and healing the soil even, and having a diverse diet. But again, it's really important that we heal that gut, right? Mm-hmm. That's part of that message, because if we don't, we have leaky gut, then food groups that we might be perceiving as really healthy can also be detrimental then, because it's getting through the gut, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Exactly right. Yeah. And so that healthy boundary really shifts your relationship to nature.
Yeah.
Because we used to think of the immune system as a battlefield, and you were just trying to battle everything out and keep it sterile. But we now know that a healthy human body is an organic garden. Your liver, your prostate, your breasts, every organ has a healthy microbiome in it. And so that healthy boundary is not there to sterilize you and create isolation. It's there to welcome in a healthy relationship to all other organisms. And the same thing in our relationships. If you build healthy boundaries in your relationships, it doesn't cut relationships off. It enriches your relationships. And so at the micro to the macro level, as we repair these boundary events in our bodies through reconnecting to nature, we're going to have just a healthier relationship to all things, whether it be our food, the water we drink, the air we breathe, the people we hang out with. That's going to heal.
Beautiful. There we go. Thank you, legend. Let's have a hug.
Glad to be with you.
Let's mix up our biomes.
That's it. Swap the biome.
If you're interested in supporting Farmer's Footprint, there are several ways you can donate to this noble cause. You can make online donations, you can attend a fundraising event, you can become a corporate sponsor, or you can volunteer. Every contribution, big or small, makes a significant impact on the mission of Farmer's Footprint to create a sustainable and regenerative future for farming. Look out for the Farmer's Footprint links in the show notes. Thank you. As always, I hope you enjoyed today's conversation. If you feel drawn to do so, then please subscribe to the show, leave a review, and don't forget to share. Sharing is caring. It really helps me to help others. If you're drawn to immersing yourself in any of the Nat Life experiences, or see yourself as a Nat Life coach, head to tonyriddle.com for details of how to immerse yourself in the community. You can follow my adventures on Instagram at The Natural Lifestylist. Big shout out to Simon from We Are the Clarks for producing, filming, editing. Much love.